Hi, this is Brian from your Nerdspace podcasts. A couple of quick notes before we jump into this episode. First of all, if you heard the wrap-up podcast from last weekend, first of all, thanks for listening. Second of all, apologies for some of the audio quality issues. We tried something new that we weren't quite ready for on a technical level, and we will address that for next time. But we'll definitely try the sort of guests panel idea again. Second of all, with reference to this podcast, just a small warning. There is some content in this podcast that refers to things that might make you feel a little bit queasy, so maybe don't listen to it while you're eating. Alright, with that, into the episode. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. H.P. Lovecraft. The plane of Innistrad is full of flavour and references to classic horror, so with Eldritch Moon and Emrakul's triumphant return for the promised end, it's time we delved into Lovecraftian horror. Eldritch itself is an Old English-derived word meaning otherworldly, weird, ghostly, or uncanny, and can be applied directly to the Eldrazi titan that is the centerpiece of the plot. Lovecraftian horror is not simply about giant monsters or warping realities, it's the terror of not understanding a changing world around you. As Stephen King has said, terror is when you come home and notice everything you have ever had has been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it. You feel its breath against your neck, but when you turn around, there's nothing there. Enter the Eldrazi on MTG Folklore. Shadows over Innistrad is in name based on Shadows over Innsmouth, a horror novella written by Lovecraft in 1931, which introduces readers to an old, decrepit seaport and its population of seemingly disturbed individuals through the eyes of a visiting student. Forced to stay the night in town, the narrator hears the legend of the Deep Ones, a humanoid civilization of immortal crossbreed fish-frogmen that the locals have developed a human sacrificing cult around. Upon encountering the creatures on land for himself, the narrator escapes the town to alert the authorities. However, over the years that follow, he realizes that he is a descendant of these creatures, slowly watching his body change as he eventually accepts this bizarre reality and plans to join his kind beneath the sea. The one key theme of this story is inevitability. The narrator's mind simply accepts such a bizarre reality given enough time, as he is unable to maintain his normal life. This happens across the Shadows block, with creatures all across Innistrad beginning the story with unnatural mutations across their bodies, from extra fingers and limbs to unholy growths. By the end of the block, a large percentage of life in the plane has been fully corrupted by Emrakul's influence, but prior to this, the mutations were taken in stride. After all, if you're used to vampires and werewolves besieging your village on a regular basis, how terrifying is an extra thumb? This style of horror is not the fear of death, destruction, or an insurmountable foe. This is the fear of humanity and our own minds. The one key story and card in Shadows over Innistrad is the Gitrog monster. The Gitrog occupies a lake near a small mountain village on Innistrad and is a local legend detailed in the magic story Sacrifice. The town elders feed livestock to the Gitrog when it emerges in the hope of keeping it away from the town, while also offering human sacrifices to appease it. In true Lovecraftian style, this is revealed not only to be simple superstition, but instead the Gitrog's own ability to corrupt survivors' minds by showing them truth in its blackest form, the clarity of 1,000 lifetimes compressed into a single moment. Hence the actual card demands you to sacrifice land to it at each upkeep, but rewards you with knowledge in the form of cards drawn for each sacrifice. The true horror to be found here is not the frog itself, which is in no way invincible, but rather the actions of the people around it. As a species, we fear change in ourselves, the idea that we could lose all understanding and switch our values on a dime to become unrecognizable. This, of course, is the delirium mechanic, as parts of our mind or library are slowly discarded until we no longer see the world in the same way, and hence the abilities on different cards change. But this also happens in nature. Now, there's been some names on this podcast that I couldn't pronounce, but this is going to take the cake. Ehaplorchus californiensis. Whatever that is a parasite whose eggs are distributed by the droppings of water birds. These eggs are eaten by aquatic horned snails, where the parasite will live for a couple of generations, before swimming out to latch onto the gills of a killifish. So far this has been relatively normal, that is until they make their way along the nerve endings into the fish's brain. Decreasing serotonin and dopamine in the unsuspecting fish, the parasite modifies the brain chemistry of its host, causing it to jump, jerk and swim far more erratically until it is finally caught by a seabird for the cycle to repeat. Likewise, Costa Rican wasps will lay their eggs in the abdomen of an orb spider, allowing the wasp larvae to live off their host before injecting a chemical into the spider with a bite. This doesn't kill the spider, in fact it's still perfectly healthy. Rather, the spider will spin a new, unnatural web designed to support the wasp's cocoon. Upon its completion, the larvae kill and eat their unwitting conscript. Of course, Innistrad is not the only home of the Eldrazi. The once carefree adventure world of Zendikar would be overrun by these creatures in a very different kind of story. Hence there is no corruption or secrecy, just hunger and distortion as the two titans decimate the plane for their own survival. Stories of an overwhelming invasion force occur throughout human history, both based on factual events and the fear of an even greater, more powerful race than ourselves. Almost all traditions and religions include a story of how our world will end, from Abrahamic beliefs of a day of judgment to older stories of cataclysmic clashes between gods and worldwide burning. What these stories all have in common is an unsurvivable, critical point in history where all life ends, which often begs the question of whether we are really alone in the universe or, more importantly, where everyone went. The Fermi paradox, named after Enrico Fermi, questions the contradiction of the high probability of other life based on the Drake equation against the lack of evidence. The Drake equation, put simply, considers the number of stars in the galaxy similar to our Sun, their age, the number of stars with planets like Earth, the likelihood of these planets having life, and then the smaller percentage that would have achieved interstellar travel based on current technological development. Finally, adding the length of time it would take to reach us at known possible speeds, the resulting mathematics suggests we should have already been visited, and yet there is no clear evidence of this fact. This leads to many possibilities, the two common being that they are already here and we can't comprehend them, or that they are no longer out there. The first possibility extends the Eldrazi and the Cthulhu mythos, beings that don't exist in any one reality, but instead only project themselves onto the planes they intend to consume. Such a species would potentially be interacting with us on an everyday basis without our knowledge, or simply consider us too insignificant to acknowledge. A second possibility is a more interesting outcome and is called the Great Filter. Based on current achievements of the human race and life on Earth, the Great Filter argument puts forth the following steps towards a sustainable, everlasting life. First, the right star system, including organics and potentially inhabitable planets. Secondly, reproductive molecules, including RNA. Thirdly, simple single-cell life, leading to complex single-cell life. Sexual reproduction, multi-cell life, tool-using animals with big brains, where we are now, and then colonizational explosion. If this final step was to have been already completed before, the known galaxy would therefore be full of life. Hence, one of these steps must act as a filter. This could mean we are rare, as we have already passed this filtering step, and that we are indeed the first to achieve this, meaning there is not yet anyone advanced enough to find us. Alternatively, we could be doomed, with the filter ahead of us somewhere in advancement. Many modern stories adapt this concept to be more than a product of evolution, but an outside force controlling development. Perhaps it's truly a form of divine intervention, an end scenario that rewards us for our achievements with a better reality. Or perhaps something out there doesn't want us to expand, watching us, judging us, waiting for the moment to consume, to deliver a promised end, promised end, promised end, promised end. MTG Folklore is written and performed by Brian Hayes in partnership with the Nerdspace Group. The music from this episode is Long Note 4 by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. For more information on Nerdspace and to get involved in future events, visit facebook.com/nerdspaceofficial or oznerdspace.wordpress.com. Next weekend is our final Dungeons & Dragons adventure event, 1st of October, and we'll be back in Croydon, so you can expect a wrap-up podcast from that, explaining everything that happened in that adventure and the persistent world in general this year. And then the subsequent weekend, expect another MTG Folklore episode, as well as another episode of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Thank you very much for listening.